Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. I understand it's only us between you and the networking drink, so we will rattle through quickly. Speaking of moving quickly, Brian, so you've been at AT&T for just over a year now,
yes.
Is that right? So in a year, you've already been shopping, you bought a $1 billion plus business, you've launched a brand. Fair to say you've moved quite quickly. Just run me through what you've been up to in the last 12 months, but also what you want to achieve in the next.
You forgot about the biggest antitrust lawsuit in history, which we prevailed in. No, it's been a very busy year. I worked at WPP for 12 years, as you know, and nice enough to see a couple of my colleagues, Jacob and Mike, here on the stage. And I went to AT&T because, as Mike said in his introduction, I think we have unrivaled assets in content, data, technology, and certainly direct-to-consumer distribution. And our vision is to use those assets in combination to build a marketplace for television and video advertising that is driven by audience buying and data. So when I got to AT&T, we were reasonably certain that we were going to close the Time Warner transaction because it's a really important component of what we want to do in television. And of course, then the lawsuit ensued, and that took about 9 months to get that resolved.
And the appeal starts again today?
Yeah, I think the appeal's being heard today.
Yeah.
But we prevailed in that, and I think it's a sign of how committed AT&T is to this concept of evolving the way content is consumed, evolving the way it's distributed, and how advertising plays a role in all of that. And so yes, we went out and we bought AppNexus. AppNexus, up until that point, was the leading independent advertising technology company. Through AppNexus, we already have access to about a $3 billion digital advertising marketplace. And AppNexus became one of 3 businesses that we then combined into Xandr. The other 2 are what used to be called AdWorks, and that is the leading addressable TV business in the United States. And we had a big data initiative inside of AT&T to pull all the data in the company together, unify that against one identity. That has become Xandr. So we needed a new brand name in order to pull these pieces together, and obviously to signal to our customers in the market that this was a much broader ambition. And the name comes from a tribute to Alexander Graham Bell, who was the inventor of the telephone and obviously the founder of AT&T.
And did you work with an agency on that? Talk me through that moment on the brand name, from sitting around in a room and throwing ideas in the air to actually finally coming to the Xandr without the E.
Yeah, so we did work with an agency, but I was convinced that when you join a company with 140 years of history, there's something there that will allow you to sort of tap into the past while signaling what's ahead of you in the future. And so I got obsessed with Alexander Graham Bell and actually went and read many of his journals and looked into the AT&T archives, and it turns out he was an interesting, quirky guy.
Go on.
Yeah, well, he was an inventive guy. He invented the telephone before he was 30 years old. And so we didn't want to name the company after Alexander Graham Bell, but we wanted to think about how do we signal innovation and invention in a very modern way. And so the notion was, well, what would Alexander Graham Bell's friends call him in 2018? We came up with Xandr.
Very good. And the names that were kind of left on the cutting room floor? Any? Lots
and lots of bad names. It's really hard to name a company.
Yeah, very true. But as far as they go, it's not, Tronk. So
no, it's not Tronk.
Do too badly.
No.
R.I.P.
Or Oath.
You said it. Okay, so what you're trying to do is quite ambitious. So in the US, at least, you're trying to build this marketplace, a one-stop shop. If I'm an advertiser and I want to advertise across national TV, data-driven, addressable, I come to you. I don't have to do 100 deals. I just go straight to Xandr.
Right.
How much traction is that getting in the marketplace with your kind of media rivals? Are they on board? What have the challenges been?
Yeah, so things are a little bit different in the US than they are in the UK, in the sense that some of these trends are accelerated, trends with kind of cord shaving and cord cutting. It's just happening faster in the US than in the UK. And what that's giving rise to is advertisers coming to us and saying, well, you're already the biggest addressable television seller in the market. We have 40 million set-top boxes, 22 million homes. We reach 170 million consumers across the US and Mexico. So that's a really strong business for us. And for all the reasons that Jacob went through and that Mike has talked about, addressable television is a really strong product. The problem is, at some point, you reach a limit in terms of how much you can spend in addressable television. So there's a couple ways for us to expand that opportunity and get more value for advertisers. One is, and a big part of why we bought AppNexus, is that we want to extend the way advertisers think about television into digital video. So imagine I can reach your same audience that I reach on a household basis and extend you into a sort of a curated garden of high quality digital inventory that feels like television. And those are other OTT environments, that's more traditional digital video. And the other way that we can expand that is to expand the market through partnering. And I think that addressable television is such that you need massive investments in technology and data in order to make it work properly. And we think, we're in this for the long term. We're the leader in the US, and so we're going to make those investments regardless. And we'd love to partner with other programmers and distributors so that we can have one marketplace. And so in that marketplace, we'd obviously be sellers, but we'd also be platform providers where others can come and use our technology. So we've announced partnerships, as an example, with Altice and Frontier, where they're going to come in and they're going to essentially pool their addressable advertising inventory with ours so that we can continue to expand that market. And the answer to your question is we see a lot of opportunity to partner, and we're having very, very good conversations. And that kind of comes back to the fact that all of programmers and distributors are under some pressure to figure this out, and we're sort of better acting in partnership than all trying to figure it out alone. And that reason is because the big digital players are going to figure it out if we don't figure it out in partnership.
But how far away, so the offer is as good as the inventory on offer, and the more of it you have, the better it is.
Right.
So how far away are you from announcing, credit, you've got Altice and others on board quite early, but those the really big ones, the NBCs and the Foxes, that
Are you looking for
like,
news here, Lara? I have none to give you. I think we're having really good conversations, and the U.S. television market is such that there's a lot going on, right? There's a lot of merging, acquisitions, et cetera. But we're working on some things that I think we're going to be ready to announce more of these partnerships in early 2019.
So moving now to advertiser demand, because I hear a lot of companies like yours and on the agency side, we just heard from Jacob and so on about the promise of addressable TV. I hear less marketers talking about that. The promise of TV is that you can reach big audiences at fairly reasonable CPMs, and actually that sometimes wastage is a good thing. You want to get that message out to big audiences. So what's the advertiser demand like for this kind of household level targeting as it stands, and what do you need to do to convince them to spend more money there?
Well, I would just correct you and say wastage is never a good thing. I think wastage is good if you think about it in the terms of the CPM, because you can lower the CPM in theory because it's not as targeted. But when you get to true attribution, then the CPM becomes less relevant because you're paying for performance, right?
What about the wastage of a Super Bowl ad, for example? BMW knows that however many tens of millions of people that are watching that aren't in the market for a BMW at that time, but you're getting something else out of it.
You're getting brand building out of that. But I agree with you, except I think that we need to get to more precise levels of measurement, even for brand building, so that an advertiser doesn't feel like there's any waste, right? And so in some cases, we can attribute all the way back to sales from somebody walking into a car dealership and buying a car who saw a TV ad. And in other ways, we need to improve the science behind measuring brand lift. And I think we can do that. Advertisers love addressable television, the ones that work with us, and probably the ones that work with Finecast and One-to-One and others. And the reason they love it is because they get full attribution. So we can show an ad to an individual household and then tell if somebody walked into a store and bought something directly, right? So this is not through some third party. This is matched up and a direct measurement of attribution. The reason why perhaps addressable television hasn't grown as quickly as some would have liked it to, and I do think it's now starting to hit that hockey stick period, is it's more expensive, and it's more expensive for good reason. The way agencies are sometimes compensated make it difficult for them to buy higher CPMs because they're not measured on performance necessarily, they're measured on sort of savings. And also, to several presentations that have happened, it's been complicated, right? It's been complicated to join up all of these different marketplaces. But that's getting much, much easier. And so I think we're now at the stage where addressable television advertising is really going to pick up. And so we need to partner effectively to make that marketplace available to advertisers and their agencies.
And I guess if people don't work together, you get the Hulu problem. Everyone I speak to that isn't in advertising that's in the US, they always talk about the Hulu problem, which is that they see the same ad 10 times in a 1 hour program.
Right.
And I presume that ad frequency is because the demand just isn't there to fill those slots. So what are you going to do on the ad frequency side as well to ensure that that experience isn't horrid?
Well, I mean, as far as frequency management is concerned, addressable television is a wonderful thing because when you look at a traditional television plan, in some cases, if you segment out the deciles of frequency, you get frequency towards the right audience, but you don't get enough frequency towards light television viewers. And those are the people that are more apt to be watching professionally produced television content through OTT or other means. Now we can find those people in addressable television, and we can frequency cap them. We can even frequency cap them in a time-shifted manner. So even if you're running a promotional ad, somebody records content and watches it 3 weeks later, if that promotion is no longer valid, they won't see that ad. And on the upside of that, if you found that the most effective frequency is a 7 or an 8, you take the ad off the box after 7 or 8, and you do not see any more advertising. So those are the kinds of things that back us into, yes, it's more expensive from a CPM standpoint, but if you look at the actual performance, it's more efficient.
And where does context come into this? I want to talk a bit more about kind of ad innovation here that you're doing behind the scenes. I know NBC are doing stuff around kind of contextually relevant advertising, so they will go through old reruns of programs and say, I don't know, there was a wedding in this scene, therefore if you're a bridal retailer or something, this is the best break to advertise in. Are you taking that into account as well? It's not just the person and the time, it's also the content that the ads are appearing.
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, I think the context is incredibly important and always has been. We've been obsessed over the last 15, 20 years with the notion of audience buying. And I was in the programmatic advertising business for a long time, and so I would go to clients and say, listen, the content's not important, it's about your audience. Well, that was never actually true. It's a combination.
Liar, Brian.
Not a liar, I'm just making a point. It's a combination. Yes, an ad, particularly in a digital environment, needs to be directed to the right person when they're ready to make a decision or when they are in a position to listen to a brand. But in television, it's a little bit different, right? Because these are, in many cases, kind of lean-back experiences, and so you don't want an abrupt ad that just feels like it came out of nowhere. Context is really important in that, but so are two other things, I would argue. One is the ad load itself, so we have to figure out a way to reduce ad load. I think you're better at that in the UK than we are in the US, particularly in some cable networks where it feels like there's just too much interruption of the content. And I think the third category is in how we innovate advertising formats. And I know that's been talked about, but we think about ad innovation in sort of a few areas. One is we can serve advertising where there was no advertising before that is not interruptive or obtrusive.
Are you talking about pause ads?
Well, so that's one way we do it. Yeah, you're going to love pause ads. You're going to love it, I promise you. I think
pause ads is so stupid. So,
thank you.
But the exact moment when someone presses pause is usually when they're going to, run to the kitchen or something. Like the exact moment they're telling the TV, I don't want to look at you and listen to you anymore.
Right.
So that's the exact moment you're thinking of putting an ad.
Well, but don't think about it as sort of, necessarily full video audio. Think about it as something that happens to the screen that is more visually appealing than what you were looking at, which was like some frozen scene, but is sort of ambient and in the background, right? I'm not suggesting that's going to reinvent television, but that is an opportunity, and we think, based on our research, that is something that is relevant to people watching TV. But that's sort of one area. I think the couple other areas are, number one, we need to make advertising more interactive. You know, Xandr is part of AT&T. AT&T is the second largest mobile network in the US, and it's the #1 television distributor in the US, which means that we can provide a lot of interactivity. Imagine you're watching a television show or a movie, and there's a product that is within the context of the content, and there's an icon on the screen that you can then use your phone to capture, and then instead of interrupting that content, interact with the advertising on your phone. And then the third area is really T-commerce, which is go buy it.
Is that something you're
That is something
making?
that we're piloting now, yes.
And sorry, I interrupted. And then the third one?
No, I was going to say the third is getting advertising closer to commerce. So take that example and just take it one step further, which is now I can actually get to the store and put that in my shopping cart and buy it with, again, full attribution back to the TV ad.
So with all that in mind, then you can then reduce the minutage of ads. Well, the minutage of the commercial break, I guess, the usual commercial break on TV. I mean, what's the ideal minute then, the minutage?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I know
is that a decision that you make as well? Is that more like a warmer media thing? Like, who would decide?
We would make that, you know, in collaboration and partnership with our content producers. So I don't think there is one answer. I think that it depends on the content. It depends on the distribution mechanism. It could be in satellite television. There's a different answer than in OTT. So you know, I'm not in the business of sort of like nailing that down to it must be 6 minutes an hour. I think that's going to depend on how quickly we innovate and how quickly the market adjusts to this new paradigm.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, and you were talking about it earlier, was measurement. Where would you, if you had to give a grade, like a school grade, A to F, where is TV measurement at the moment? Is it still really bad? Everyone says it's terrible.
No, I don't think it's really bad. I think it has to evolve. And
so what's your letter?
I would give it a B-. That
seems good.
Yeah. But the way advertisers and agencies buy television is changing. And frankly, the way advertisers think about engagement is changing. And so while we're still in this world where advertisers and agencies buy television and then they buy digital, we're getting to a world where that's going to start to come together. And when that does start to come together, we need cross-channel measurement. And I would say we're at sort of a D- on cross-channel measurement, which I think is the future of what we all want to, the future of how we all want to measure our marketing spend.
And how do you get there? And that can only be an industry-wide partnership, everyone agreeing on something.
Well, my theory is that advertisers, sophisticated advertisers, will likely land with their own measurement standard, and that we're going to have sort of a bifurcation between measurement and verification. Advertisers want third-party verification that their ad ran when we said it was going to run. And then I think, and we've already seen this, advertisers are getting much more sophisticated with how they ingest data from television distributors and other digital distributors and match that to sales or brand lift. And so our most sophisticated advertisers buy our attribution products, but they also ingest that into their own multi-touch attribution models. And that's really how they measure whether we perform or not. And I actually think that's the future.
So the future is what, buying on outcomes as opposed to buying on ratings? Like what does it look? What will that look like? Where do you think most advertisers will
I think
move?
it's buying on outcomes, but you have to think about outcomes more broadly because of your earlier question, which is it's not always a sale. Sometimes the outcome is building your brand. And I think we're going to get much more scientific with matching an impression to those types of outcomes.
Sure. We mentioned earlier that obviously before you joined AT&T, you were on the other side. You're at WPP and you're a very senior executive at Group M. I imagine obviously you've been watching kind of what's been happening in the holding company world, and it's been...
Feels like I got out just in time.
Well, I mean, I was going to say it's been challenging, and to be fair, some of the companies have been handling it better than others.
Yeah.
Where do you see that particular market going with all the challenges they have? You know, the shift to digital, consultants coming in, clients, you know, cutting back on their spending. Is it consolidation? I mean, do some of these companies go away? Are they going to, you know, rise like a phoenix out of their flames and they solve everything next year?
I'm incredibly bullish about agencies. I was being flip about getting out in time, and I still have a lot of colleagues and friends that work at WPP and lots of other agencies. I think the nature of agencies is changing, and they are making further investments in their own data, in their own technology, in their own platforms. The role of an agency within the media world is to join up disparate marketplaces to make them, to make it more efficient for advertisers. And frankly, it's never been more complicated than it is now. So I think the nature of the agency is going to change. It's going to become more data-centric. There are going to be more data scientists, perhaps, than account managers. And frankly, I think that's a really good thing, because we need more science behind the media planning and buying process. And I think as a result of that change in the nature of those services, the business model will change also. There's been a huge distraction around transparency, and I think that's good, but I think we sort of need to sort that out, turn the page, and get to business models that make sense for agencies. Because I will tell you that in many cases, agencies are not allowed to do their best work because of the contracts they have with advertisers that say they must continue to see improvement in television rates. Now that's fine, but that needs to be coupled with metrics around performance as well, true performance. And I think if we can compensate agencies that way, then they will continue to innovate and provide great products to the market. So I'm very bullish. I think that we're sort of getting through this transition phase, and they'll be very successful.
Very good. Nice to end it on a positive note. If everyone could give a big round of applause to Brian Lesser, CEO of Xandr. Thank you.